All right, I think we should get started. Today is December 27th. Happy holidays, everybody. I hope that Santa was good to you. This will be our last video of 2023. Mike, what's your thoughts on 2023? You and I spoke a little bit about this earlier. What's 2023 looked like for you? What's 2024 going to look like?
2023 was a very challenging year. A lot of great sales volume. Transactions, I think, for most in the area were down just because of inventory, but very excited about 2024. We've got declining interest rates and rising inventory, and that bodes very well for 2024. So very excited, and I really think that 2024 will be a much different year than the year we just are wrapping up.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mike. It was interesting. I think it was just in the last 2 weeks or so when the Fed announced kind of what their plan or their strategy was for some of these rate hikes or decreases. The market got pretty excited, and you saw how quickly the sentiment changed from 1 minute to the next, where they all of a sudden there was, mortgage rates started to get some downward pressure. There was a little bit more positivity in the market. You saw stocks and bonds kind of go up a bit. And that gave me a lot of hope. Before that announcement, before they said that, it was hard to be a whole lot optimistic, very optimistic for 2024, quite frankly.
The thing that jumped out at me, Christian, was that the Fed recently announced that they might cut interest rates sooner than they originally had indicated. And why that's relevant, if you think about the season down here, our big season is the first half of the year. It's not the second half of the year. So if the Fed does cut rates earlier than was originally projected, forecasted, whatever, that could be very interesting here. I don't expect anything in January or February, but how soon will they start cutting? That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, and I think I don't really expect them to start cutting soon. I think it's going to be at least middle of the year, especially with elections. There might be some pressure in that way, but yeah, you're going to be at least 6 months. But them just saying it had this effect, even on me, where it's like, oh, okay. And then, Mike, you and I spoke about mortgage rates and just seeing it kind of creep into the sixes, even if it was brief. That was pretty encouraging. I liked seeing that.
Very encouraging. Now, I'm pretty bullish on next year. This year was very challenging. I mean, at the beginning part of the year, inventory was very low, and you need inventory to sell. Probably one of the most challenging years that I've seen in 24 years of doing this. But despite that, we had a decent market in the Southwest Florida area, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, Dad,
in a
you and I.
weird way, I kind of like the challenging years. I find I myself learn a heck of a lot more if I'm pushed. If it's comfortable and easy, you don't learn anything. And if you can survive through 2023, you eliminate a lot of competition. People who are marginal fall out of it. So I tend to look at it as an opportunity. Both. I mean, it's not fun to learn under stressful conditions, but you do end up better off for it.
Yeah, I agree. And Dad, you and I spoke about some of the existing challenges to this market. And so I wrote in my invite to this class that 2024, year of the condo.
Yeah.
And this is my guess, right? This is my plan for 2024 is that I think we're going to have a lot of condo things come up this year. So if we look at the cost of this market, prices are still very high. I don't really expect them to come down, but because of that, people are going to look for a different way, a cheaper way to be in this market, and condos offer that, especially since we had the big hurricane at the end of 2022, Hurricane Ian, and that has still put a lot of condos out of commission. Dad, you and I did an entire video on condos and kind of what could happen, you know, as these associations are fixing and repairing and getting people back in, and you know,
Right.
it's starting to normalize. But we also talked about the challenges involved with financing some of these condos. And what I've seen is that more and more there's just so many moving parts with condos that getting a mortgage is really challenging, really, really challenging.
I
Did you
think you
learn
really
anything
need to
when,
local.
would you say?
No, I think you really need to have a local lender when you're dealing with condos, because they'll know off the top of their head what condominiums comply with Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac.
Yeah.
They'll know if their insurance policies comply. They'll know if there are third-party owned facilities that people are forced to join. They're going to know if somebody owns 10% or more of the condo units off the top of their head, because this is where they work.
Right.
So, you know, if you're buying a condo, and not using a local lender, I think you're crazy. I think an out-of-state pre-qual letter is not worth the paper it's written on.
Yeah, and to give people some perspective on that, I completely agree with you. I used to believe, and Dad, you've been saying this for the last 2 decades, that use a local lender, but now we have even more ammunition as to why this is relevant. If you have a lender doing condo sales throughout the country, Arkansas, New Jersey, Wyoming, it doesn't really matter. You know, there's a lot of things that are pretty normal about that. You know, they send a condo letter to the board fills it out, sends it back to the lender, and the questions and answers are very predictable. You know, here's our budget, here's our insurance policy, here's how many people are renting their units. And, you know, for the most part, like when I was practicing in Atlanta, 99% of the condos were FHA and VA approved.
Right.
Like they were on a list. You could get it online. I think the last time I looked at the Southwest Florida list for FHA and veteran or VA approved condos, when you really looked at it, there were zero, because I think there were 4 or 5 listed, 3 had expired, 1 was void, and the last one had been torn down. So it was 0. There are 0 FHA and VA approved. Now, it doesn't mean you can't get an FHA or VA loan in those communities, but it does mean that what you said, Dad, you gotta know off the top of your head whether that one's going to work.
Well, and there's little things like if you're dealing with somebody at a bank, they're not necessarily licensed mortgage brokers. You know, you can be at a bank and take an order for a loan and not be licensed, versus somebody who's out in an independently owned company. They have to be licensed.
Yeah.
So the lenders down here that you deal with, who rely on realtors and attorneys and word of mouth for their livelihood, they're more apt to put some underwriting. They'll do underwriting out of order. They'll check the finances of the condo, you know, right away when they're filling out the order. They'll know whether a particular condominium has been Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac approved or not.
They'll look at the insurance policy up front, as opposed to I had a lender in New Jersey. They checked the insurance policy the day before closing, and then they got denied. So I guess our advice to people that are involved in a condo sale: number one, cash is king. I believe that more than any other property at the moment. With condos, cash is king. Even if the borrower is a no-brainer for being approved, it's more about the property being approved that matters. They've got to be able to underwrite the property. And the condos right now, they're problematic. They're dealing with just getting up and running again, let alone helping a lender get approved for a Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac compliance issue. Not fun. And so I wrote down a couple of things. Again, 2024, year of the condo. Repairs, you know, if we're evaluating condos, I want to make sure the repairs are done, that we know the cost, that we know insurance is involved. You know, and then to that, insurance. What kind of insurance does the board have? You know, do they have replacement coverage? Do they have fair market coverage? One's cheaper than the other. You know, if you imagine if you had a major catastrophe and they only had to give you what the property was worth, they didn't actually have to repair it. That could be quite different. Regulations. So Dad, you and I were reading this. One of our
Bill.
local attorneys wrote this. Bill Morris wrote this in the Coastal Breeze News magazine. And he's talking about the condominium association, the new regulations that were passed since the Surfside collapse.
Yeah,
And
the
so
reserve
this
study,
is,
the milestone inspections, the reserve requirements, and they're kicking in at the end of 2024 in many cases.
and all these regulations, they've been on the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac condo letters that the lenders require to be completed. They've been on there for the last year or so. So in this one, the first part of the new law is inspections. Phase 1 milestone inspections are required for residential condos by December 31st of their 30th year and every 10 years thereafter. So if you have an association that's at least 30 years old, this is going to be new to them for 2024. Deadline for those that reach 30 years before the end of 2022. They can extend with good cause. There's a lot there. There's your summary. But phase 1, they need to be able to do a report, an engineering report, to make sure that there are no structural defects that need to be addressed right away. And if the engineer can't give them a clear review, a clear pass, then it goes to phase 2 and actually making the repairs. And if they don't make the repairs, they could, get kicked out of the association, or, they could lose their rights to occupy the property. It could be condemned. But Dad, there's also regulations that require certain reserves, right?
They have to fully fund them. They can't waive them anymore like they used to, and they can't be under too low. So there's a contingent liability of a massive special assessment at the end of 2024, potentially for the older places that are
imagine you had an older community that they've been deferring maintenance because they've got a lot of other things they're working through. So they're deferring. This engineering report comes out and they realize they can't defer anymore. So in order to replenish their reserves, they're going to have to do a special assessment. They're going to have to raise money somehow.
Well, you look at Surfside. I mean, it was 136 units. They needed $10 million. They had about 700,000. It would have been 75,000 or so per unit. Now, we've only had that once that I know of here in Collier County, and that was the Monaco after Hurricane Wilma. It was like $116,000. They had multiple lawsuits and everything else, but when it was all said and done, the owners had to kick in 112 or 116,000.
Yeah. And it's really hard to, to make your fellow neighbors pay 75,000, 100,000 more or less, because they're people, right? And you're going to see them in the common areas. That, unit 101, they're struggling, and unit 102, they're not. But these regulations are going to take that, that out of the equation. They're going to make us comply with it. It's gonna be an interesting world in that. And I think if I'm selling a condo, I need to be very aware of this possibility and what these regulations are. One thing that I wanted to point out is that I do believe that the condo document requirements will be modified in the next 12 to 24 months.
Well, FARBAR has already done it, Christian. FARBAR in their comprehensive rider requires the milestone inspection report summary, the structural integrity reserve study.
Right.
And talking to one lender in town here, he suggested we also ask for the last 6 months of board of director minutes, because they don't like how some of these associations are filling out the questionnaires, being non-responsive. So they want to see what they've been talking about for the last 6 months.
Yeah, and I think FARBAR's been more proactive about it because of the way their form is drafted. They've added a lot of things that go above and beyond the statutory requirements, whereas NABOR is still leaning on just what's the bare minimum. But I think NABOR might change that. I don't have any real information as to whether that will happen, but we see this coming, and FARBAR got ahead of it. I think NABOR is gonna have to adjust to that, and you're gonna see where these engineering reports are going to be required to be disclosed, even though it's not yet.
Anyone using a NABOR contract, I would suggest, just taking the language out of the FARBAR form and then adding to that, 6 months of board of directive minutes. Because that's what the lenders in town are asking for.
Yeah, and from the seller's perspective, I think that will really help facilitate whether you have a deal or not. So a lot of times we're very, territorial. We don't want to have to do more than we absolutely have to. But in this case, the sooner the buyer's lender knows if it can work or not, the better off the seller is.
I
things out.
truly worry that if you underreport in this issue, it's going to fall under Johnson v. Davis again. They
Seller
have,
disclosure. Yeah.
well, the seller disclosure, they have a special carve out for things in the public records, and this would be public records stuff. It's a case by case basis, the Azam case. So who wants to be on the line on something that's a couple $100,000 special assessment?
Right.
I mean, a case by case basis, a couple $100,000 in $1 million condo is going to be material.
Now, some interesting parts about this law: it does not impact condos that are 2 stories or less. So if it's 1 or 2 stories, these regulations are not applying to those condos. But if it's at least 3 or more, then it will apply. And we're all going to have to learn. We're all going to have to get on board. This is effective as of January 1st, I think. So we'll see how this goes.
Christian, let me interrupt you for 1 second. Yes, it doesn't apply to 2 stories or less, but for how long? That's a big question right there, because I could easily see down the road maybe that changing, and I fall in under this. I have a 2-story condo where they've been deferring adding to the reserves. And the lesson that I learned, and this is a lesson for everybody, is that for those that don't follow what their board is doing, their condo board is doing, you might want to follow what they're doing, because you might find there are things you weren't aware of.
Well, in the place you're in, Mike, do you have some buildings at 3 stories and some at 2?
Yeah, all 2.
Well, they only have, if this law only applies to the 3, but let's assume that they, do a walkthrough inspection, a structural integrity, a milestone inspection for the 3-story buildings, and they find something structurally wrong. I would argue that there's a reasonable basis case that can be made that, hey, they might have a problem with the 2-story ones just under simple negligence law.
Yeah, I think both of you are on the same page that this doesn't mean that 2-story condos are, perfectly structural sound and, financially sound. It's just that, we probably need to be better at how we manage these aging condo complexes.
Well, I mean, look at Surfside. I mean, if some of those, if Surfside was comprised of 3-story places and 2-story places, and they only fixed the 3-story places, and then the 2-story places collapsed and killed people, there'd be litigation. That would be foreseeable.
Yeah,
I would argue.
Absolutely. So just to finish up on this one, all budgets adopted on or after December 31st, 2024. So this would be probably budgets going to 2025. Owners cannot vote to waive or reduce structural integrity reserves as they have been able to do in the past. So 2 years, like Dad, you said, 2 years before its collapse, Surfside owners had an engineering report of major structural damage and the need for extensive repairs, but only 7% of the funds to complete repair and replacement projects. Surfside had about $700,000 in reserves, while a subsequent study recommended it have $10.3 million.
Yeah, there's like 95 people who died.
Condos are supposed to do this. So reserve studies are something that happens all across the country. And it breaks down the major items that need to be done regularly. So you look at roofs, you might have siding, you could have parking lot, paint, whatever it may be, and they'll put a useful life. So let's say it's a roof. They'll say, all right, it's a brand new roof. It's got a 25-year useful life. So we need to be putting 1/25th towards reserves every year. And then 10 years later, they would do an updated reserve study. Now, my condo in Atlanta that I had, they deferred maintenance on things through the 2008 financial crisis because they were struggling just to get people to pay the bills. And then 10 years later, when I bought in there, they dropped the hammer and they borrowed $5 million to start fixing things that they needed to fix 10 years earlier. In fact, Dad, I don't know if you remember, but my bedroom ceiling caved in on me because they had ignored the roof for like 20 years. So These things, and that my unit was only 2 stories. It wouldn't have been, wouldn't have been subject to this regulation. But I think it's a good thing. It's just going to scare some people. It's going to be kind of like ripping the Band-Aid off. I wish there was a slow burn on some of this, but for some condos, I think this will be like a punch in the nose.
I mean, historically, if the roof went in a condo and you didn't have enough money in the roof category, you would just borrow from one of the other categories.
Sure.
I mean, and I would typically tell buyers, it's like a house. Very rarely do you have everything go all at once unless it's Hurricane Ian. So, we were able to get away with it for the last 30, 40 years. But
Yeah.
they're going to mandate that each category be fully funded. So,
Yep. Now if I summarize some of this, I'm not totally down on condos. I do think there's opportunity, and we just have to be very educated when marketing, buying, and selling these properties, because you're going to have a lot of units come on the market in 2024. Mike, we're already seeing inventory increase across the board. I think all those condo complexes along the water, they're going to be flooding our market. I really think you're going to see people that haven't used it because of COVID, because it's been in repair, or because they've been sick. All those sellers potentially will come to sell their property. So if you're a listing agent, this could be a really great opportunity, but price it correctly. There are real challenges. You got to find a cash buyer if you can, and you got to educate the buyer, educate the lender, and go above and beyond to make this a smooth deal. These are not easy sales, in my opinion. There's a lot of moving parts, and everyone needs information: buyers, sellers, lenders.
And part of the difficulty, you got to convince the seller that it actually benefits them to go above and beyond. It bulletproofs them from litigation after the closing. Because if the buyer finds out after the closing that there was something that the seller knew or should have known about and didn't tell them, they're going to get sued. So insulate yourself from liability by telling the buyer up front, about the structural integrity reserve study or any other studies that were done in the place, and then make your deal.
So Mara says, if a developer is building a new 3-story condo, how will this new rule apply to the creation and implementation of a new budget from the developer side? So it really only impacts condos that are 30 years old, 30?
Yeah. 30.
So it won't impact that new association right away. And who knows what 30 years, I mean, that could come down. It could be any units over 15 years, but initially it probably won't have a massive impact on those, other than you use it to market the property and say, look, all those older communities, you may be paying less for the price, for the purchase price, but you're going to have all these special assessments. You're going to have these budgets, these engineering reports, and this brand new condo isn't subject to them. And then Deb asks, why do I think that the condos will be on sale during 2024? It may take some time, but we already saw 23 as this mini correction, where, at least in my opinion, I saw some properties that sold right away, just like 2022, just like 2021. When they hit the market, they had a flood of buyers. But we also saw this new thing of properties that didn't sell right away. Days on market tripled this year because it's almost like the haves and the have-nots. If you have a great property, it'll sell. No question about it. You have a lot of buyers, is a very special market. But if your property has some warts on it, if it's got some issues, if you're priced too high, it's going to sit. And that's why I think there's going to be this rush of condos, is that they've been sitting.
Look at first-time home buyers, Christian. Your first home was a 2-bedroom condo.
Yeah,
that's all you could afford at the time.
It was my training wheels to home ownership. That's what I said.
Yeah.
Now,
It was
punch me in the
beautiful.
nose.
Great.
I think calling condos a training wheels is a very naive thing of me to do. I think that condos, you have the same issues of a single family home. It's just that it's disguised because you're in it with a lot of other people, and other people are making the decisions for you. Dad, I would say it's comparable to when I worked for someone else versus when I work for myself. When I work for myself, I get to make all the decisions myself. oh my gosh, I have to make all the decisions myself. Oh,
Isn't that fun?
isn't that fun? That's awful. Condos are like that. It's like you can criticize the board, criticize the property manager all you want, but they're doing the work. They just send you the bill. There's some benefits to both. There really are. And I just think that there's going to be a flood of condos. I think all those properties on Gulf Shore, all the properties up in Lee County and Bonita, even down on Marco, 2023 was a tough market to sell those because they were being fixed. They were being, they were losing renters and then gaining them. It was just a little unknown, a lot of unknown. And I think in 24, my hope is that we have more knowns. We're going to know more about insurance. We're going to know more about these regulations. We're going to hopefully be better funded, better financially or fiscally responsible with condos. I mean, it's been a roller coaster the last couple of years. And my hope is that 24 allows some of this to come down to earth, some of it to materialize, all the hard work. So if you're selling condos, if you're going that direction, if you have a buyer who wants to buy a condo, it's open eyes, open ears, making a deal. I think you can solve for all these issues if you buy it at the right price. Pricing.
Yeah,
Pricing
Christian,
is
there's something that jumps out at me here, and that this is an opportunity for real estate agents that are working with buyers. And by that, I mean, you think about showing a couple a condo, they're not thinking about reserves, insurance, anything like that. They're thinking of, wow, what a beautiful view. Wow, look at the kitchen. Wow, look. But the realtor, if you have some knowledge on insurance and how the reserves work and the status of that, you can literally save them with saying, hey, here's something you might want to look at.
Oh, I agree, Mike. I'll speak from my perspective. When my wife and I were buying a house, we were, back in Naples for our first time, and I knew a lot about the legal side of it. I really, I know the contracts, I know the financing, but I didn't know about, wood rot. I didn't know about tile roofs. I didn't know about, being on a slab foundation. I didn't know what it would be like to be a member of a condo board or something like that. I think that when I was working with different real estate agents, they blew me away with their knowledge because to them, this is what they see every day. That was the driver. And it allowed not only me, but my wife to feel like, wow, we're not alone. And I think that's where you guys drive the most value is you're here every day. You don't have to know everything, but you add a new dynamic, a new dimension to our thinking that we don't have otherwise. I
It's
think
a huge value. I mean, your realtor lives across the street from you. He can't run if he pulled the fast one. He was hugely helpful.
We're part of the community. It's also, Dad, why we like using local lenders because we're going to run into them at Publix. We're all in this together. No one wants what's, the bad turnout for us. And
The
to
local
that point,
live and breathe on realtor referrals. They really, really do.
as
So,
opposed to a banker who gets the walk-in.
well, some guy from New York. I mean, he's not going to care if Christian Ross refers him anything. He knows you're not going to.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me. I want to make sure this is the next topic number 2. Ready for it? Buyer brokerage agreements. All right. So I did a buyer brokerage video 2 weeks ago. I did it without you guys because I didn't want any opinions. No opinions. No. What I did is I evaluated the 2 neighbor buyer brokerage forms, and I'll give you the quick summary. Number 1, it's on YouTube, youtube.com/Christian Ross. The second summary is I think everyone should use one, no matter where you get your clients from. If you get them, all from referrals, there's someone on this video who told me I get all my clients from referral. I see you. You're out there. Yep, he's on there. It's not that. It's all about disclosure. And it's making sure that your buyer is loyal to you. And there are 2 great forms, depending on how you want to interact with your client. There's the 1-page form that basically allocates, it says, here's the only fee I'm gonna ever charge you. It's my transaction fee, or it's whatever. But I may make additional compensation from the listing agent's cooperative fee. I like that form a lot, especially if you're including it in an offer. It's, the buyer's going to sign your sales contract. They're going to sign the seller disclosure. They're going to sign all this stuff. And they're also going to sign this 1-pager saying, hey, I'm going to make a commission from the seller, plus this is the fee that you're going to charge me. I'm fully disclosing it. I like that form a lot. The other form is a 3-page buyer brokerage form that is great. It's also from Nabor, and it goes a little bit further. And I would prefer this one over the 1-page, but I would take either. And I would also work that into my strategy of, hey, look, this allocates or it describes what I'm going to do for you, what you're going to commit to me, and how we're all going to get paid. And the thing I love about it is that it says, hey, look, the listing agent or the seller, they're going to pay my commission, and I get to keep whatever they pay me. It could be 2%, it could be 3%, could be 4% or more. I get whatever it is. But if they don't, here's what you'll pay me. And there's a little line that you can put whatever you want in there. You can put 0. You can put 1. You can put 2%. You can put 3%. You can put a dollar amount. And it's only if the seller doesn't pay you. So I love that form. And if you have a buyer that's going to fight you on this, you could put 0, saying, look, you're not going to have to owe me anything. But if we find a property that they pay commission, I get to keep all of it. I love that. Dad,
The best part about that video, Christian, and I told you this earlier, was you explaining how it was presented to you, how realtors present the form in an inoffensive manner, matter-of-fact way, no big deal, and you signed it twice. Not a problem. That's helpful. This is a perfect opportunity to learn how to do this and to experiment a little bit, the best method, how much to ask for and all that.
I agree. Here's the form. Look at that guy. Buyer Brokerage Agreements. I love them, and why you should too. Look at that, almost 200 views. I like this form. I've gotten a lot of feedback from agents here in town that said, I'm going to implement this in everything I do. That makes a lot of sense. And just to give you the quick summary, when I was buying a house, my broker showed me around all day on a Saturday. We looked at 10 or 12 different properties. And at the very end, before we went our separate ways, he gave me a folder similar to what I have here. And on one page, look, it's empty. On one page was the contract, and it had, here's the typical contract that we will probably be using when you make your first offer. Here are the addendas. Here's the lead paint disclosure. Here's what a seller disclosure looks like. So that was one page. And on the other page was a buyer brokerage agreement. And it said, this is our agreement. This is my agreement with you. Here's what all the things I'm going to do, all the effort I'm going to put in, and this is how I get paid. It's like, okay. He said, when you have a chance to review it, go ahead and sign it, send it back. And then he said the thing that you'll have to figure out how to do yourselves. But he said, if for any reason you don't want to work with me anymore, we'll just rip it up. Don't even worry about it. And it put me, at that point, I just had to trust, right? The contract didn't say that. It didn't. But we'd had such a great experience with him that day. He wasn't doing a hard sell. He wasn't forcing me. And I don't know what he would have said if I'd said no. He probably would have just not done as much for me, right? He wouldn't.
Well, he convinced you, a lawyer, to sign the form. That's pretty amazing.
And then to his credit, this is the part I left out of the video. I did fire him. It didn't work. He actually yelled at my wife. And because he didn't like something, I don't remember what it was, and he's like, you can't do that. And I said, well, you know what you can't do anymore is you can't work with us. And to his credit, he followed through and he ripped it up, and we went a different way. Wasn't that big a deal. These forms are not scary. I think it was 10, now it's 14 different states actually mandate these forms. I would work it into your process. And if someone were to fight you back on it, you at least have more information than you had before. So there's that video. I recommend taking a chance at it. It's 20 minutes.
I really liked it. I was going to write on that same topic, and you beat me to it. The added benefit, in addition to the NAR litigation that's going on, would be if your customer goes wandering around on a Sunday and goes to an open house and signs something without putting you down as the realtor, which I've seen with my father, quite a few times. Or they meet somebody at a cocktail party that becomes their new best buddy and they want to use them instead of you because they're kicking back 1% at closing. It protects you in that situation. So it's a win-win. You protect yourself no matter what happens with NAR, and you become a better realtor who's not going to lose commissions because they walk in an open house or they meet somebody who's their new best friend.
Hey, Mike, let me ask you a question. You've done a lot of these arbitrations down at the local board of realtor board.
Yep.
Do you think, let's say you're going in there saying, look, what are the terms when you're the contributing factor to the sale? Thank you. And so you come to your arbitration, you've got the other realtor on the side who they actually got the commission or they're the ones on the contract, but you're coming in saying, hey, I showed them the property first. I was the one that contacted the listing agent first. We looked at it and then the buyer went with someone else. He's like,
Yeah.
Wouldn't it help if you also had a buyer brokerage agreement?
That would be a royal flush.
Thank you. I agree. Yeah, it would make our jobs almost too easy. So this isn't just between you and your buyers, between you and anyone that tries to steal your buyer. And it's a loyalty agreement.
Skill to learn, it really is.
I'll try not to beat a dead horse. I like those forms. I think we should try and work our way in to that in 2024. I think that would be pretty helpful.
I mean, the worst that happens is they say no. And you just experiment and experiment until you find a way that works, and it'll protect you no matter what happens in the future.
Here's topic number 3. We ready for it? Topic number 3. This came up recently. This was a proof of funds issue. So as a recap, I'm not sure if anyone else realized this, but NABOR and FARBAR do not require a buyer to provide proof of funds. It's not part of the contract. Now, I've seen other contracts where it's a part of that. If the seller requests proof of funds, the buyer shall mandatory provide that within so many days. If you want that on these contracts, you're going to have to ask in advance. You're going to have to put it into the contract if you don't get it in advance. So that's lesson number 1, ask for proof of funds. And then I had a scenario recently where the buyer was being private, didn't want to share information on how much money they have in their bank account. And I don't blame them. That's an invasion. Dad, I don't think you would like showing how much money is in your bank account. Mike,
I hate to tell you what I've done in those situations.
Yeah, so
I'll take the 5th.
Yeah, I'll take the 5th. So the listing agent called me a little bit panicked because she knew that the seller probably wasn't going to like that, wanted to know that everything was going to be perfect and great. And all of a sudden the buyer's putting up these walls and saying, and so the listing agent's thought was, okay, let's get a letter from the bank saying that he's got enough money to settle this. That's pretty good. But we also know we have kind of a volatile seller. That's what she described it as. The seller probably would explode if this deal didn't go through. And if it's because the buyer didn't have the money, well, guess what? The listing agent would get blamed. So she was asking my opinion, what is another option? How else can we handle this? And my solution was, and it always is in scenarios like this, is you have to give the buyer options. You can't just say no. You can't say it's not good enough. We don't want to really, mess up the deal, that's for sure. But we want to give the buyer options. And that way the buyer gets to choose. And Dad, it's kind of like parenting, right? You don't always want to just say no. You kind of want to give your child options. Like, well, you can have my Porsche or you can have my boat, right?
I don't remember doing that.
No, you don't remember that conversation. Okay, so the option I came up with was, and in this scenario, the buyer was going to put up $10,000 now, and then the remaining, I think $40,000 in 10 or 15 days. So they were going to have about a 5% deposit down when it's all said and done after inspections and with 2 weeks later. Now, we've talked a lot about deposits. That's mediocre, right? It's not low, but it's also not 10%, which is what we really are searching for. So I suggested that we give the buyer 2 options. Number 1, get us a bank statement with exactly how much you have. We want a screenshot, whatever it is, or put up a 10% deposit immediately. If you want to maintain your privacy, if that is something that you prioritize, put up more money. all we're trying to do is make the seller feel comfortable that you're going to move forward with the deal, that you're not going to blame not having the money on that later. Does that make sense? Is that what you would have suggested?
It does. When I've done it, I've usually gone with a letter from the president of the bank saying that so-and-so has more than enough funds to purchase this property. If I'm going to send a bank statement, I have to white out account numbers and things like that. And that would bother me personally.
Yeah.
Showing exactly what's in my account.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the only remedy that a seller has under NABOR contract, at least, is to sue for, or to take the liquidated damages, the deposit. Deposits actually made. So if I want to make the seller feel comfortable that the buyer is going to move forward, I want 10% deposit with the offer, like with the executed contract, or in day 0 or day 1. That's even better, because I don't care if you have 100 million in the bank. You're never going to let me touch it if the deposit's super low and the deal doesn't go through. Farmer's a little different, right?
Rare situations where we've paid the deposit directly to the seller and not put it in escrow. It's in their hand. There's no escrow dispute. But we would do that after we did the title work. We had a survey, whatever it is, so we knew there was no marketable title issues.
But
that's very rare.
That's a hard one to do right out of the gate. But if let's say the buyer were to push back on us after I made that recommendation, so I give the buyer those 2 options: put up 10% immediately, or show us your bank details. Whatever you want to do, you let me know. Option number 3, if the buyer really fights us on it, is we say, all right, put up 5% deposit immediately. And then on day 10, after your inspections, that gets released to the seller immediately. So you got your inspections, you're protected for these 10 days. And once you move forward, it's done. It's non-refundable. It's in the seller's hands. At that point, the buyer's done their title search. They hopefully have all that back. It's another option. What we're dealing with at that point, going back to condos, going back to some of this other stuff we've talked about, is in buyer brokerage agreement, we're having a conversation. If we never push back, if we never draw a line in the sand, then we really don't know who we're dealing with. We don't know whether we can trust this person, because we're just assuming that we can trust them. We're hoping that we can trust them. But we're trying to verify. That's what we're really doing. Trying to verify, trying to give us leverage.
It's like, why not? I mean, we have so many things facing us, the litigation that's out there, the unstable customer. Why not try something that's going to make you better and that's going to make you more money? I mean, the worst that happens is it doesn't work for you. That's all.
Yeah, I had a deal recently. It did end up terminating, unfortunately, but the buyer had made some bad assumptions as to what kind of loan he could get. He thought he could do 100% financing on a $2 million home, and that was never going to be the case. And when he found that out, he knew he was short, and he didn't have the cash to come up with the 30% down. And so we kicked around a lot of different options and seller financing. But I think it could have been very helpful if we had proof of funds at the beginning, and it showed that he had, 400,000 in the bank. If he had 400,000, it's like, you're buying a $2 million house, you have 400 in the bank. Like, aren't you cutting a little close there? Maybe that's enough, right? Maybe if it was 100,000, then we'd be really scared. He doesn't even have the money for the down payment. But it's another issue to think about, right?
I mean, and I definitely would use a lawyer on these, because there's a lot of nuances to it. There really is.
Yeah.
When to offer to give them the deposit, when not to, how to do the letter that you're referring to.
Yeah, in that deal, to bring that full circle, they brought me in to evaluate it because I was representing the seller. And the proposal was, okay, we're going to give them, the seller's going to be the second lender. They're going to be the second lender on it, because he's still going to go out and get a conventional first. And I poked a hole in the balloon immediately and said, no lender in their right mind will allow you to 100% finance the deal. If they were, they would give it to you themselves. But they're not going to let you go get a second mortgage from the seller or anyone else, because they want you to have skin in the game. They want you to have equity. It makes them more safe. And when I did that, I told the buyer, said, go talk to your lender before we spend a whole lot of time on this, because that's not going to fly. And he called me back, an hour later. He's like, you were right. It's like, that's not going to work. We got to think of other options.
Yeah, they see that on the closing statement, they're not gonna like it.
No, they're never gonna allow that. The last thing I wanted to talk about, Homestead. We've done a lot of videos on this. I've had a couple of emails recently about it, just following up, but there are a lot of people that are getting advice from out-of-state attorneys, out-of-state lenders, out-of-state realtors that's not really relevant to how we do business in Florida. All these assumptions, all this stuff that you learn on YouTube, you know, obviously not our stuff. Our stuff's great. It's perfect. But if you watch these videos from other people online, they're going to tell you that LLCs are the greatest thing since sliced bread. That if you own property, you should put it in LLC, or if you own property, you should put it into a trust. Dad, you and I we did a video. In fact, here's one. I don't like trusts, but he does, right? Got to do the education, got to do the research, got to talk to someone who is local and knows the laws of that area. And I think LLCs have a place, but not every place. We've done 3 or 4 deals this week where we're taking the property out of the client's LLC and putting it into their personal name. And that's so that they can take advantage of the homestead protections and the homestead tax benefits. And the only reason they put it in LLC to begin with was because that's what their accountant or attorney in Minnesota, New Jersey, Illinois told them to do. And it's not that it was bad advice. It just didn't consider all the factors, didn't consider the Florida laws that actually benefit an individual holding title.
And when I'm selling homestead to somebody, I always use the OJ case as an example. I mean, it really seems to drive the point home. The reason he moved to this state was because of a $40 million civil judgment against him. And he could move to this state and have his home protected, his pensions protected, you know, his actor's pension was protected, his football pension was protected. So when he went away, he didn't go away, but ultimately he went away for something else, his family was safe. So homestead is that powerful that you can evade a $40 million judgment. LLCs you can pierce. I mean, they will pierce. I mean, a litigator will pierce the veil and say you didn't adequately capitalize it for the foreseeable needs of that business if you're renting property out and somebody drowns in the pool. So yeah, it's almost a no-brainer.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for all that you did this year for me and for being part of these videos.
Oh,
Mike,
welcome.
Dad, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining, and good luck and happy holidays.
Take care.